questions afterwards. And does that sound alright?
That's
perfect. Great. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for having me. And as Brenda said, my name is Colletta Dalikeni. I am originally from Zimbabwe. I came to Ireland about 25 years ago. And I'll tell you a small story, a little story about how I came to Ireland. I met a guy called Jean Vanier, French-Canadian, and he started communities all over the world, lush communities. And I remember at that time I had finished my A-levels and I was kind of wondering what I wanted to do with myself or with my life. And I heard that Jean Vanier was going to talk about lush communities. And I went and I sat in the crowd and listened to what he was saying. And he was talking about the cry of the poor for relationships, the cry of the poor to be heard. And I found his concept very interesting because what he was talking about really was to do with the fact that we can learn so much from people with learning disabilities. And I thought, God, this is very interesting. In my country, people with learning disabilities are outcast. They're just hidden away from society. So I came to Ireland then. I went to talk to Jean and I said to him, I would love to go and live in a community like this and learn a little bit about what Lush is about. So he directed me to Ireland. He said to me, you can go to a number of countries, but you will have to learn a language if you go to Italy or to France or whatever. But if you go to Ireland, the weather is very cold, but the people's hearts are very warm. So that was my first introduction to Ireland, and I came here then. And I remember after 2 years working in Lush, I studied then in UCC, University College Cork. I went to study social work, and from then on, then I went back home and then came back to Ireland. I loved the place that much, not the weather, but just Ireland. And I came back and did my PhD then in Queen's University. It was supervised by Dr. Trevor Spratt and Caroline Scahill. The two of them were quite helpful in getting and seeing me through the trauma of the PhD. I want to talk about the findings from my research, but what I will start by doing is by just setting the scene. It's difficult to just talk about my research without highlighting a little bit what's going on today with the Syrian refugees. I won't focus on that too much, but I've just drawn some statistics for you to just give you an overview of what's going on today in the world. I'm sure you know, but just, I suppose, to refresh our minds. When I started my research, it would have been in 2006. So the people I was interviewing had come into the country from between 1992, they would have been there here from this whole period. There was a peak at one time in Ireland where a lot of us people were coming to seek asylum. So most of the families I interviewed would have come in during that peak time. So I caught up with them then in the direct provision centers that they were living in. And I will explain what direct provision is about. I've got a clip to show you of the voices of some of the people who are in direct provision and what they say about their experiences. We are told that the total of refugees has increased significantly and consistently over the past 4 years. So if we think about just the past 4 years and not think too much way back, about the UNHCR says that starting from 10.4 million at the end of 2011, the number increased to 10.5 million. In 2012, we know that 11.7 million in 2013, and finally to 14.4 million by the end of 2014. By mid-2015, it has reached an estimate 15.5 million, its highest level in 20 years, within 3.5 years. then the global refugee population grew by 4.7 million persons, some 45%. So we have big numbers. When we see people trying to flee from Syria, the numbers of people trying to flee and get to places of safety, we're talking about millions, and we're talking about thousands and thousands of people. Again, if you go onto the UNHCR website, you find out the trends as to where are these people fleeing to, and where exactly are they going, and who is hosting most asylum seekers, refugees. And what seems to happen is that when people seek asylum, the easiest thing to do is to go to a neighboring country. It takes a while for people to travel. Like when we look at the Syrian refugee crisis, people are going to the neighboring countries. Most of the people are going to the neighboring countries. Then we have people who have managed to go through the unsafe routes of going through the Mediterranean Sea and then dying. And so you've got two kinds of people some people will risk it and they want to go and reach to Europe, but some people will go to the neighboring country and are content and will stay there. Okay, so that's just a breakdown of where people are going today, the different countries that are hosting refugees. Germany seems to be the country that has been most welcoming so far. Okay. Yeah, again, that's all just a breakdown of who is hosting people, most people. Okay. The questions I sought to answer in my research were, what were the experiences of child protection social workers of working with asylum seekers, and vice versa. So I wanted to hear from social workers, what is it like for you to be working with asylum seeking families? And I wanted to hear from families, what is that experience like for them? So that was my research was as simple as that. I wanted to go into centers where asylum seekers were living, sit and talk to them about their experiences of working with child protection social workers, and I wanted to hear from families what the experience was like. For those of you who are mad into research, and a lot of people, social workers sometimes are, I wasn't myself until I started doing this. The model I used for my research was action research. I used action research because action research is practitioner-based research. It's research that's done by practitioners to change practice. I was interested in reflecting on what was happening for social workers at the time, what was happening in social work at that time. And again, just to say that how I chose to look into this topic is that at the time I started researching this topic, there were quite a number of young people who were coming across. I'm in Dundalk, we're kind of on the border, we're a border kind of place. So there were a lot of young people who were coming from Belfast or from the north, and they were finding route to come into the south through Belfast or through some way. And they would land into our child protection social work offices in Dundalk. And normally the guards would bring them to the office, and social workers there was always a whispering going on about, Colletta, what do you think is the age of that guy sitting in there? How old do you think he is? So whoever was the duty social worker might have been talking to this young person, and this young person might have said, well, I am 12 or I am 16, but the social worker would be trying to gauge the age of the person, and they wouldn't know, because most of the young people coming through were African young people. So I almost started to feel as if I was the black social worker in the house, having to deal with any black young people coming in. And I thought, oh my God, I better look into this to see what's going on. Okay, so basically it was, I suppose, an anxiety in social workers about how do I tell somebody's age? And when I talk to somebody, and if they sound more grown up than they actually look, how do I assess this? Therein lies an issue of assessment that straight away was hitting social workers. Okay, so I said, okay, I'll carry out some piece of research. I was supported by the HSC to carry out the research, so I started trotting back and forth from Dundalk to Belfast for supervision, and I registered for my PhD. Action research is really about planning and acting, observing and reflecting. It's about doing research and reflecting on it and in the hope that you can change something. So the overall orientation of action research is really researching in practice and wanting to change something. I used biographic narrative as a method of collecting data. And biographic narrative is like storytelling. It's like, it was just about asking one question. I like to talk a lot, so this was hard for me. I had to be disciplined to just ask one question and then listen. So this was a test for my listening skills in social work. I used thematic analysis to analyze the data. The sample was not a very large sample, but significant enough to be telling of what these experiences are. So I had 10 social workers and 10 families. So what I did initially was to go to case files in different areas within the Northeast. So the research was conducted in different social work offices within the Northeast. And what I looked for, I sought ethical approval to look at the files, and I matched social worker to family. So I was interested in hearing the voice of particular social worker who worked with a particular family. So by looking at the files, which I was very lucky to gain access to, because social work files are not always easy to get access to. But I was able to gain access to it because I was within the social work practice myself at the time. Okay, so we had a sample of 10 social workers and 10 family members. So the families, I made sure I was interviewing carers. So I wasn't interviewing anybody under 18. So the ethical approval that I was given was to interview parents and anybody who was caring for a child. The family members originated from Nigeria, from DRC Congo, from South Africa. The research limitation, I suppose, is that people will argue in terms of qualitative research that how representative is this. But I don't think I was looking for quantity, I was looking for quality. So to me, it didn't matter anyway. I wanted to hear the voices of these families. And I didn't claim that this was representative of all families, but I claimed that it highlighted the issues that existed for social workers and families. Okay? The question that I asked, the one question that I asked to social workers and to families was this, a mouthful. So, as you know, I'm interested in the experiences of child protection social workers who have worked with refugees or asylum-seeking families. Can you please tell me the story of your intervention with family X? So I would say that to the social workers. Can you please tell me the story? So I was looking for the story. I was looking for the narrative. Okay. I'm interested in all the events and experiences that were important to you personally. I will listen first. I will not interrupt. I will just take some notes in case I have any questions when you are finished. Please take your time and blah, blah, blah. So I went on like that. And then I would stop. I did not think this method would work for me. To families, I also said, as you know, I'm interested in the experiences of asylum-seeking families who have worked with child protection social workers. Can you tell me the story about how the intervention went between yourself and the social workers? So what I would do is I would listen to the story. So the social worker would start normally by, okay, we got a referral to the office that this family was in the direct provision center and there were child protection concerns. The concerns were this, and we had to visit. When I go to the families and I say, can you remember, I do a prompt, can you remember when the social workers, oh, I do remember, I never forget that day, and I can tell you about it. And they start narrating the story. I'd listen, and then when they stop, I would take three things. One that they said from the beginning, one they said in the middle, and one they said in the end, and ask them to tell me more narrative about it. So I would repeat in their own words. That's the way this method works. In their own words. Okay, so you said there were child protection concerns that were reported. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Okay. And then in the middle, I'll pick something else. If they said, well, and we decided that these children had to come into care, or these children, I'll say, can you tell me a little bit more about that? And towards the end, to the families, I'll do the same. I'll say, okay, so you said the social worker came and they knocked on your door. Can you tell me what that was like? Tell me a little bit more about that. They knocked on the door, and then what? And then I'll hear. And I found that when you talk to people and you relate back in their own words what they have said to you, it reminds them of something else that happened during that day, and they keep going on with the narrative. So the main things that emerged from the narratives of social workers were to do with mistrust and mistrust, age assessment, immigration and direct provision, cultural differences, communication and linguistic issues, racism, legal concerns and cultural practices, empathy, and the impact of personal experiences on practice, training, interagency collaboration, resources, the role of the social worker. I'm not going to, if I have to cover all this, we will be here until tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day. But I'm going to just highlight some of the findings from some of those areas, that both from the social workers and from the families. Again, if we look at the narratives of the families, some of the themes were similar, but some of them were different. There were themes that were specific to social workers, and then there were some themes that were specific to families. The trust and mistrust was on both sides. Social workers didn't trust families, families didn't trust social workers. It was just the way it was. Immigration was an issue for social workers, it was an issue for families. Isolation and lack of support network was an issue for families. The impact of direct provision on parenting was an issue for families, but also for social workers. Parenting in direct provision, families parenting in that system was an issue for families. But again, for social workers, looking on and seeing families struggling and trying to parent within the system. The issue of deportation was an issue for social workers, but sometimes it was an issue for families, but sometimes for social workers as well. There was an issue around, how do I work with this family? I don't know, how do I put a plan in place to work? I don't know if they're going to be here tomorrow. Because social workers work with another system, which is the Department of Justice, which governs asylum seekers. And that is a totally different system which they have no control over. So they have no control over when people are going to be deported or whether or not people are going to be deported. And all they have to do is their side of work that they do. But doing that work was challenging for social workers in a situation where they don't know, are you going to be here tomorrow? So how do I put a care plan in place? How do we plan? What is it that we are planning for? Okay. Cultural differences were issues were an issue for families, but they were also an issue for social workers. How do you work with somebody from a culturally and linguistically different place? What the issues that arise from that? The issues that are to do with culture. How do you know that this is a cultural issue, or is somebody just being like that? That was an issue for language and communication, racism, legal concerns, and cultural practices. What the legislation says about what must be done, and what policy and procedure says about what must be done, especially in the South, the Children First national guidelines lays out clearly what is abuse, what is not abuse. But in practice, when you are dealing with a family that's coming from a culturally different place, what's defined is abuse within that legislation, or within that policy, sometimes is defined as just a child rearing practice. Slapping children who have been seniors, I grew up being slapped. That's what we do. We slap children to discipline them and to show them that's not right. And we do it, in fact, that's so that they can remember it. Because if you just talk to them, they might not remember it. So a little slap would not do any harm. So there would be, that would have been a view of some parents. And then social workers would say, no, that actually can fall under child abuse. But then it's not clear either. It's very grey as to when is a slap abuse and when is it just the discipline. That's not clear within the set out policies and the set out guidelines. And social workers have to try and figure out, well, was that slap just okay? Was that just a tap on the hand and it's okay? Or does that have potential to kill a child? Or is slapping not slapping? The law in the Republic doesn't, I don't know here in Northern Ireland, it's not very clear about do we slap or don't we slap. So there were a lot of issues to do with that. Okay, the direct provision system is a recipe for disaster. If you look at one of these slides, these are people, parents, queuing for food. Normally people have nowhere to cook. They live in a place where they go and queue for their food and for their children's food. So there are no facilities for cooking. There are no cooking facilities. It's very institutionalized. It's a very disempowering system. So I will show a bit of a slide that will bring in the voices of people who are in direct provision, and then we'll move it on from there. I'm going to chance this and see if it will work. This was done by, I was glad when I found this, because it's been difficult to interview people in direct provision. For a long time, they were not allowed to speak to reporters or to be interviewed. It was difficult, but it's good that this video was done, because it has made people aware of now.
You just scroll down.
I don't want to be sent out of the system for speaking against the system.
I've been in Ireland for the past 4 years.
For 8 years now.
7 years with my child.
6 years.
5 years and 6 months.
6 years now.
Past 6 years and 4 months now.
Nearly 8 years.
I want a permission for work. This government is not giving to me a permission, but I love this country, I like this country, I respect this country.
They should allow us to work in order for us to provide for our family, so that our children will see us as a responsible mother and father and family in Highland.
We live in cramped conditions, and in our homes are very small. I find it very hard to do my homework because I can't concentrate at all. When you close the doors, you can still hear my brothers and sisters crying. And there are 5 people in my house, so living with other people and my mother, it's very hard. We can hear her crying at night, and it's very hard for me to sleep.
What I want is a home for my child. I want her to live like other children, because every year when it's her birthday, she comes to me and asks me, "Mommy, are you going to do my birthday again in the corridor?" Who will be happy with their child doing their birthday in the corridor? A hotel corridor for that matter.
Earlier this summer, I sat my Leaving Cert. If I get enough points, I'd love to go on to study accounting, but unfortunately, as an asylum seeker, it's not very easy to do so, because before you get your status, you'd have to pay large sums of money, and which our parents are not able to afford, and unfortunately, you're not able to avail of the student grant. You're not an Irish citizen.
I did my Leaving Cert 4 years ago, but unfortunately I can't go to college. I had applied for herbal science in Cork, but I got my place. I had to defer because as an asylum seeker, you're not entitled to go to college. At the moment, I've been sitting at home, I haven't been doing nothing. I've been just going round and round in circles and waiting. I don't know how long I'll be waiting to go to college. You know, sometimes you think, okay, maybe the next year I might be able to go, but it's been 4 years. It's becoming more and more frustrating.
I'm not allowed to work, but I'm entitled to a living allowance of €19.10 a week. I'm an insulin-dependent diabetic, so on prescriptions a week I spend €7.50, which comes off my €19.10. I have 2 children, teenage children. They each get €9.60 a week, and they have things that they need for school. I need to pay for those activities and school books from that allowance as well. I need to buy washing powder. I need to buy dishwashing liquid. I need to buy cleaning detergents of my €19.10 a week. There's no way I can manage.
After being 5 years in the system, director provisions, finally I got my paper, and this is good news. I'm happy. I'm focusing on finding a work or a job to do, but unfortunately I found it very, very difficult because employers will ask about work experience. I missed because I was not allowed to work at that period of time for the 5 years. End of April I got my paper, but about 2 months I didn't get a house to live due to different things. One of them is rent allowance is not accepted. Second, the landlords were asking about references. Unfortunately, the center where I was living, they refused to give me written reference.
You can see me walking on the street thinking that I'm normal, but to tell you the truth, I'm mentally disturbed because of being there for 8 years. We don't know when we are going to come out, and that's really mentally disturbing. Some of us, we came here when we were normal, but now we are abnormal. And some of us came here when we were walking with your 2 legs, being able to do things for yourself, but now we can't do nothing.
I'm here since 2008. Last week on Thursday, they deported my husband. I feel very bad because he's the one who supports me. Since that day, I don't do anything because it's very difficult for me to live with 2 children without my husband. Actually, I'm not feeling well.
When I came here, I was okay. I was not depressed. My brain was functioning normally and correct. But ever since I got there, I lose my mind, I lose my temper. I am so short-tempered since I got to this place. I am depressed. I've been taking depression medication since I was 27 years old. Today I am 30 years old. My hair is going. They said it's stress-related. And if stress could remove my head, so what next is going to happen? I need a life just like any other human being.
Yeah, so direct provision is a costly business anyway. Apart, the human cost and the financial cost of it has been documented recently by the Irish Times. It is, they say that in all there are about 17 firms which receive about 50 million a year to run 34 accommodation centers across the state. About 4,000 asylum seekers, right? So the people who benefit from the plight of asylum seekers at the moment are the people who run these firms. They keep some of their funds in the state, but they are also able to keep them in offshore jurisdictions. So, the two things I want to say before they escape me is that the whole thing of asylum seeking is a humanitarian crisis, but sometimes it's criminalized. The way it's dealt with is criminalized. When you listen to these people, they are in limbo, they are in a state. I mean, when you go to prison, you're given a sentence, and you know when your sentence will be up. When you go into direct provision, you go in there, but you really don't know when you're going to get out. You know you will get out one day, and you might get your refugee status, or you might not, but you don't know when. And I think mentally, just to be in a state like that, I found when I interviewed these families, is challenging and is very, very difficult. To be in the state of not knowing, to then be in the state of not being allowed to work, to be in the state of, even if you do so well in your education, you can't go forward to university. Social work is about empowerment. Social work is about advocacy. Social work is about all the things that you do that are great. And to function within a system like that, I think social workers found it challenging. So if I'm going to just talk a little bit about some of the things, and this is the voices of some of the families and the social workers. Talking about the system of direct provision, one of the social workers would have said they see the whole concept of it as crazy, and that the people have no rights. So people in that situation, in direct provision, have no rights. This social worker believes that even if when people go into direct provision, even if they are okay, because of the way the system is, it does make them crazy. Okay? It is institutional life. It is not good for children. It is not good for anybody. And this would have been one social worker. This family member said that they felt that their life was on hold. They felt that doing the asylum process was like putting your life on hold. Your life was on hold for a while. You can't go anywhere. You can't do anything. Just sit and wait. Okay? This person had been in direct provision for 5 years waiting for the decision. They felt in themselves that, look, at least I'm out of the war zone. I'm here, I'm being looked after. It's hard, but I'm safe. So they felt in one way they had to be grateful of that. Even though they were not, even though their life was on hold, but their life was safe on hold. So they, in their own mind, they had this conflict of, oh my God, I wish I could do something else. But then, well, I can't. I'm here, I can't work. I have no money I get my 19 euro a week, and if I have a child, 960, and there's only so much you can do with 19 euro. 19 euro at the way the exchange rate is would be maybe about a 10 or I don't know, 12 pounds. Family members in direct provision, it is hard to get to know the people in the camp. Even though these people had a common story, which was of asylum, it was hard for them. This family member would have been saying it's hard to get to know the people in there and make friends with them because you don't know. Even though you are all from Northern Ireland, you don't know, is this person okay? You don't know, is this person coming from the area that you fled away from, and are they going to do harm to you? So you know you're from the same country, but you know you have the same story, but you don't trust enough to engage in a friendly relationship with that person. So being together didn't mean anything. It didn't mean you could advance any relationships with the people you were living with. I started to feel as if I was going crazy. Yeah, the whole thing of mental health. People who flee from war-torn areas, they come in, and if we look at the Syrians, they come in already, they are traumatized. They are suffering trauma before they even get here. But then they get here, they've seen a lot. Sometimes they've seen, this guy who they've seen, my brother had been killed, and I was wondering if I would ever see my other children. So when people flee, it's either they can manage to bring everybody along with them, or they manage to just flee themselves. And they're worried about what they've left behind. So they have all this going on. And this was one of the concerns of this recipient. Okay. Yeah, these were some of the interrelated issues. The issue of trust was a difficult one. Another thing, this was the social worker speaking, another thing is that most families who are in the asylum process do not trust social workers because they know we work with immigration officers. At the end of the day, we are authority like immigration officers. So a lot of social workers would have said that they find that families don't trust immigration. And when social workers go in, they are employed by the government. They are state agents. And families found it difficult to differentiate between social workers and immigration officers. They found it difficult. First of all, they're coming from a different system anyway, where the role of social work and what social workers do in different countries is very different. So how social workers intervene is very different. Therefore, when they came here, first of all, they struggled with understanding the role of the social worker. And then when they got to grips with it, most of them would have said, social workers ask a lot of questions. Social workers would have said, I ask questions because I must make an assessment. Families would have said, well, they ask a lot of questions, they are like immigration officers. So social workers were a reminder of immigration intervention, and families struggled with the way immigration officers treat them, which was very heavy-handed. Because immigration is about, as you know, about establishing eligibility. Are you eligible to be here or not? Are you telling a fib or are you telling a true story? Is your story credible or not credible? And if it's not a credible story and you shouldn't be here, well then we need to ascertain that. So they're not going to have jokes with you, or they're not going to have fun tricks with you. They are just there, and their purpose is this. But social workers do a little bit of the trying to tease out, but in a different way. They're trying to assess the situation. They're trying to find out. But for these families, it all seemed to get very clouded. It all seemed to be the one. Okay. This family member said you wouldn't want to tell them too much. You wouldn't know where it will end. They work with the immigration people. It's hard to trust them. Okay. The social workers on the role of child protection, then there's a bit of contradiction, according to this social worker, in the social work role as well, in that we are officials with a government within a government department, so maybe they were right not to trust us, because at the end of the day, we are official people, and we can't be withholding information if we know it. So if social workers find out some stuff, this social worker was saying, well, I have to report it. If there's a concern, I have to deal with it. So That's just the way it is. That's the nature of the beast. That's the nature of the job. Okay. In my country, the social workers, they would help you if you were having problems, but here they seem to come to you even when you don't look for them. Families found it strange that social workers could just arrive at your door. They unannounced. They didn't require an invitation. In some of the places where they came from, social workers came because they were invited, and they came because there was a reason. Well, social workers always intervene because there is a reason. The reasons here, in this case, were normally child protection concerns reported. And then families didn't understand. Okay, so they've come, and they've come because I've left my children alone. They've come because I've slapped my child. They didn't understand these reasons. These reasons didn't make sense to them, and they had to get their heads around them. Okay. Around the issue of trust, I knew from talking to the children that they were suspicious of me because they said very little, even when I tried to get to know them by probing into their stories. Yeah, this social worker was working with young people, and she said she found that the children said very little. They did not say a lot, even though she was trying to form a relationship with them, but they didn't say much. These young people were over 18 when I interviewed them, and they were saying that when they had to go to the Department of Justice to be questioned about the reason why they were here and their story of being here, they found the social worker an adult to have. So to them, the social worker was a good person. It was an ally. At least they didn't have to go on their own. At least they had somebody along with them. And they liked that because even though the social workers, when they were within the Department of Justice, their role was just to sit and listen to the intervention between the Department of Justice and the children, and not advocate or speak out or say no. It was just to be an observer. Okay. So these children would have loved, they liked having the social workers around. This family member on documentation was saying, the social worker, they said they wanted my children's birth certificate, and I told them I didn't have them because they were burnt when the house was destroyed. Social workers wanted to establish, you have children, what ages are they? And they would have liked sometimes to see the evidence of, and these families didn't have them. And in some countries, there are countries where the things are not recorded. You'd think in this day and age, everywhere in the world, we should have documentation of your age and of your everything else, but some families just didn't have them. And that caused a bit of friction between social workers and families, because then social workers couldn't determine, is this really the age of the child? This social worker said she wondered whether Dorothy, who was one of the families, again a pseudonym, she wondered about her stories sometimes. She felt that Dorothy was probably not telling the truth, because sometimes she'd say the child was 10, and then sometimes she'd say the child was 12. So that in the mind of the social worker was, can you make up your mind? What age is this child? So the issues of trust, the challenges of trust and mistrust are to do with care and control. The care and control role of within the child protection system. Yes, social workers are there to care, but there is also a control aspect to it. And the literature tells us a lot about this care and control, and as I'm sure you are aware of it. That balance becomes very magnified when you deal with people within this kind of crisis. So social workers were not seen by families as independent of immigration officers. They were just seen as officials. Asylum seeking family status, no documentation, living in direct provision, and challenges of parenting in direct provision, waiting for their decision and status. That was a a challenge. Okay. Again, here then, when working with immigration officers, social workers had a problem in defining their role. So my role as a social worker is to advocate. But when I go and I bring a young person, I'm not allowed to speak. It's like shoo, 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 shoo. It's us and the child. So then what is my role? Why am I here? If my role is just to accompany this young person, what is my role? I think that as time goes on, I found that it depended with the social worker. There were some social workers who were persistent. If they were not allowed to speak, they did write things down. They were frustrated because they got one-word answers, but they pushed and pushed and pushed. But most social workers found working with immigration officers very difficult. Again, they struggled with the whole thing of interagency collaboration. We know that we must all work together. So if the Department of Justice sees themselves as the boss unto themselves, and social workers can't really do their job of advocating and of speaking up on behalf of, well, then social workers found that hard. Okay. These social workers said it was hard to work with immigration. You are planning one thing for the family and they are working on another. So sometimes they will be planning something and then they hear, oh, that family has been deported. They were deported last night in the middle of the night. They are not there anymore. But they have no control over that. You can't plan for families as you do not know whether they will be there the next day or not. How can you develop a care plan? It's difficult to know and very demoralizing in your own way. And this social worker was battling and trying to connect with immigration and the Department of Justice, and very clearly saying that they found the system very secretive and not open and difficult to work with. They didn't know what to expect anymore than the young people themselves. After my research, I wrote an article in the Irish Times about how social workers were just as disempowered as the people they were working with, how the system disempowered them and they were just not allowed to do their job. So if you Google Colletta, Dalikeni in it, and social worker is disempowered as the one, that article will come up. So these social workers said that they found it difficult because they were sitting and observing children being treated like adults. So whenever they brought the child to the Department of Justice to be questioned about their asylum status, they found it difficult. And some of the social workers said they found it difficult because they had children who were maybe 10 or 11, and for them to observe and to watch a child of that age being interrogated was difficult to take in, because it made them feel, well, I have Johnny at home who is that age. How would Johnny react in this situation? As social workers, our stories always creep in. Reflective practice is always about reflecting on how the interaction between our own story and the story of the people that we serve. And therefore, some of these social workers found it hard to say, look, that's there within my face, so, and what do I do about it? And this social worker said the one thing that they remembered definitely was the fear of the children when they had to answer accusations put to them. So these children would have been asked questions, and they would have been asked maybe the same question a number of times, because immigration would be trying to establish, look, is the story consistent? Are you saying, they ask them in a way to establish, are they telling the truth or not? And I was given the impression that I was not allowed to advocate for the young person. I was merely accompanying them. It was a Department of Justice process. I remember when the introductions were going on, they were not interested in my name or where I was coming from. So it was just like, you're a social worker, well, who wants to know? You're here, so what? So interagency collaboration does not seem to be in operation. It doesn't seem to work when it comes to social workers and the Department of Justice. This social worker said it is difficult to make a proper assessment. Here is talking about cultural differences in terms of child rearing practice. To decide whether there is a secure attachment between the children and their parents. This family especially, the mothers are very rough with the children. They slap them and everything. Okay. The parents would have said, this family member would have said, the social worker, they told me I should tell my children I love them and I should not slap my children. She would have said, well, I don't tell my children I love them. She took exception to telling her children that she loves them. She said, I show my children that I love them. And how I show them that I love them is by doing something for them. I will buy them a pair of shoes. And her interpretation of showing love was that, rather than hug, hug, kiss, kiss, I love you. So there was always a problem, because social workers would say, well, I'm trying to assess the level of attachment here. And their perception and their view, according to Bowlby's attachment theory, of what to look out for in secure attachment or non-secure attachment, didn't seem to present itself within this family. I remember going out, and James, who was 3 years old, had been left wandering around the Direct Provision Center. This social worker was just telling a story about little James, who the mother just left him there to play. And the social workers would have said, well, you can't just leave your child like that. Your child is your business. You must look after your child. And the mother would have been saying, well, children are raised by a whole community, not by an individual. But the social worker would have said, well, but we don't behave like that here. So there was always a problem, because we don't behave like that here was said to these families who had no access to here. So where was here? In Ireland we don't slap children, but these families had no access to Ireland. They live in this direct provision center where they're not actually connected with what's going on. So they don't know whether people in Ireland slap children or not. They don't have a measure of judging that. And it's like news to them. It's like news flash. Oh, I didn't know that. That's how I was raised. And we all know that our frame of reference of doing things is how they've been done. Well, what we've grown up with, what we know. Until we are educated otherwise, we just behave the way we behave. We don't know that something is wrong until we're told that it's wrong and why it's wrong. But in this case, these social workers were trying to say, no, you have to look after your child. You have to be there 24/7 with your child. And this family would have been saying, well, I normally leave my child just wander off, and I think it's good for them. So that would cause a conflict. The social worker, they said you have to look after your child all the time. You can't leave them to play without looking. But in my country, the child does not belong to one person. It belongs to the whole community. And I can even correct anyone's child if I see children fighting. So I couldn't understand. There was that whole business of, this family would have been coming from a background where if they saw 2 children fighting, they would stop them and say, no, don't slap your friend. You can't do that. They would chastise, they would discipline, even if they are not the parent. But social workers then were saying to them, well, you can't really do that. But then they don't know by what frame of reference you don't do that. So they didn't have, because they are so isolated, they are living in this system, they don't know what's going on outside. The language and communication, I find when the parents speak, they shout, and even if they are speaking English, it's hard to understand what they are saying. Sometimes you have to tell them to slow down. Yes, social workers struggled with the way, with high-pitched voices sometimes of some families when people were speaking, and they would have said to them, can you slow down? And on the other hand, I have to speak loud to let the social worker know what I'm saying, because I think they don't understand. But she keeps saying, don't shout. I don't think they like it if you don't speak English. Most of these families did not speak English. They didn't have English as their first language. And I think that when you don't have the language, what happens is you get very frustrated trying to express yourself. And some of the shouting is probably naturally that their voices are raised, but some of it was also probably that they were thinking by shouting, they are making the social worker hear them, and all to the annoyance of the social worker. Okay. I know growing up could speak English, but it's the way she spoke that made it difficult. The English language is a great language, but even within people who speak English, the English language is interpreted differently by different people. I have seen that sometimes when somebody says something, someone might pick it to mean something totally different from what the person is actually. So when you don't speak the language, and then you're trying to speak the language and convey and get yourself understood, it was challenging, I think, for both sides, for the families and for the social workers. Yes, the use of interpreters is a thing that social workers did, but using interpreters has been known to be very expensive. It costs a fortune. And it seemed in these situations that social workers were only able to use interpreters when cases were going to court, or if there was a child protection conference, or if there was something going on. Not just for day-to-day, let's talk about what's going on here, let's talk about the concerns that has been raised about that. That did not happen. Social workers had to figure out how to converse. And I think that speaking, sometimes social workers would have said that you think that someone has heard what you are saying. These families, sometimes they don't understand what you're saying, but they just nod their head and you think they understand it, and they don't understand it. And you see them doing the same thing next time, and then you know they didn't understand it. So the whole thing of understand, and we know that communication is the big thing in social work. Communication is the backdrop of. So if we can't communicate, if we don't trust each other, what kind of practice is that? The children never looked at you when you were talking to them. It was hard to judge were they being cheeky or what. Sometimes I thought it was because they were not telling the truth. Eye contact is a problem because it's something that you are either raised with or you're not. These families, most of them, would have said, well, if you're a child and you look an adult in the face, it means you're being cheeky, you're being rude. Social workers, on the other hand, would have said, well, if you are a young person and I'm talking to you and you're looking down and you're looking everywhere, it means you're lying. So there again lies another conflict, because then the interpretation that's put on behavior by both sides, not just by one side, by both sides, was different. So I think I'm being respectful of you by not looking at you, and you think I'm being cheeky. Okay. So the social worker used to ask the children to look at her when she was talking, but in my country you don't look up at adults. When they speak, you look down as a sign of respect. So actually, it was considered to be a sign of respect. And social workers would think, how am I going to make an assessment? Like the whole thing is just a joke. The whole thing is full of lies. They can't even look you in the eyes. You just know they're lying. Okay, so just to wind the whole thing down, you'll be glad I'm nearly finished. Some recommendations that came out of my research were to do with the need to review the direct provision system and replace it with a fair and equitable system. But this recommendation has been made by so many people. It's still not changing anything. System reform of interagency collaboration, work between immigration and social workers and child protection social workers. Just if they could only be facilitated to work together even though their roles are different. But if they could work together, it would be great. To ensure asylum seekers in direct provision are given more choice and autonomy, which they don't have, to review and increase their allowance, 19 euros. The 19 euros has been in operation for over 15 years now. And that children's allowances have been changed and have been reviewed so many times within Ireland, within the Republic. But that allowance has remained that way. And when you look at children's rights and the CRC and how this is so much in breach of human rights and children's rights, it's shocking. It is the next thing, I think, that's going to hit Ireland so badly when these children who are being born in direct provision, who are now Irish, will come back to haunt the country and say, I was here before, and this is how you looked after me. So, and for some reason, nobody can see this coming, or else they see it coming and they just don't care. I don't know what it is, but it's just something, a bubble that's waiting to burst, I think, in terms of children's rights and in terms of human rights. So HIQA, as you probably know, and the Children's Ombudsman role, their remit is not extended to children in direct provision. HIQA has inspected a lot of places where children live, in a lot of institutions, but the remit of HIQA does not extend. It has not been extended to direct provision centers. So that and the Children's Ombudsman, their role, I think, I suggested, is needed to be extended. The training in cultural competency and cultural sensitivity for social workers would help social workers in their understanding of what it is that's going on. Cultural awareness is a good thing to have, but cultural sensitivity and cultural competence, to be competent in dealing with people from different cultural backgrounds, can be challenging. But it's something that I think social workers were kind of afraid of. They were sometimes afraid of challenging certain practices that they would see in case they would be deemed racist, or in case. Most social workers would have said, oh, I saw them doing such and such, but I wasn't sure. It becomes cultural relativism. Well, like we have done in some cases with people from the traveling community. Well, that's how they behave. That's how they raise their children. So but is the important question to ask is this a child welfare concern? Does it rest? Is the behavior that's going on here in the best interest of the child? Does it protect the best interest of the child? Whether it's a different culture or not, but is it good for the child? Is it in the best interest of that? That should always be our measure. But we sometimes can get very clouded and very caught up in issues and then forget to focus on what is important. Yeah, I think, yeah, that's me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Probably time for some questions. So, does anybody have anything they'd want to ask Colletta?
Yeah, I'd be happy to take some questions. Yeah.
So I just note your recommendations about ICRA and the Children's Commissioner, and to whom have you made those recommendations, and what has the response been?
What has the response been? The response, no, has been nothing. Just like we have been making a recommendation about direct provision, we've been promised that it will be changed, and whenever there's an opportunity to change things, I've always got together with some social workers and say, look, let's make a submission. You get a response back to say, well, we're going to look into that. We'll be looking at it. So you just wait then and see, but it drags on and on and on and on.
Just one, do you know, in recognition of the kind of mental health issues that people would have experienced then, well, maybe as a result of the trauma from their country of origin, and then as a result of the kind of situation that they were living in Ireland. Did the welfare system look at that and try and put any preventative measures in around helping people adapt to change and address their mental health issues, or was it all a child protection response?
No, I haven't seen something that's been put in place really to address that. We have had suicides with people who are in direct provision. We have had people who have mental health problems, but I haven't seen a body. They used to have a body called Spiras, an organization that used to look after that. But whenever there's cutbacks, that kind of service is the first one to be cut. Whenever other things come up that are probably considered more important, those sort of services go, and they go very quickly. The mental health issues are a worry. They are a concern, because you're talking about parents who have these problems trying to parent within the system with very little support. And that's why the child protection concerns cannot stop. They won't stop, because the prevention is not happening. We're being reactive more than proactive. So, unless prevention is put in there, well, the situation sadly will remain. Yeah?
Can I ask, are there specialised teams working with asylum-seeking families? Is there another social worker?
No.
I think that would be good.
It would. You think specialized teams would be good too? Yes, it would. It would. No, there isn't. They're just social work teams, and there's just there is a team in Dublin for separated children seeking asylum. In Dublin, there is an office but that's a different thing. They only look at issues dealing with separated children who arrive in the state with no parents. So that team is there. It's based. It was in Baggot Street, but it's based in Dublin, and it looks after those young people. But normally, what you find is that issues to do with asylum-seeking families just arrive at any social work team, and any social worker is supposed to be able to deal with them. In England, it's different. They have different teams that really specialize in looking and working with asylum seeking.
I think it would be great if there was sort of help, to help.
It would. It would.
And make it a lot easier.
Yes.
The system and vision services.
Yes, it would. My worry is that, as the figures tell us, the issue of asylum is not going away very quickly. It's gonna hit us one way or the other, wherever we are. I don't know what it's like for you here in Northern Ireland, but it's one that seems to be set to grow rather than shrink.
I think from the inspection point of view, that it can't be a single agency inspection. It's like the prison service where you have a diverse number of people, in that situation, or anyone who's in detention. I think it has to be a multidisciplinary team review of that child and that child's needs. I wouldn't be in favour of just a single agency inspection.
Sorry, I say that again.
In the situation in the immigration detention centre, I don't think only social workers can look at the needs of those children. I think it has to be
a multidisciplinary, sure.
A multidisciplinary team.
Yes. Yeah. But where is the multidisciplinary team? I mean, we know, we have seen from one case to another what has happened when there is a multidisciplinary team working. When there is multidisciplinary team and people don't work well together. I mean, if we think about the Victoria Clindy case, we saw what happened with that case. I mean, when we have a multidisciplinary team, as long as it connects and as long as it works, it benefits the service users. If it does not work, on the other hand, we have the situation then of the immigration officers and the social workers that's at play there. Until something seriously happens and there's an inquiry.
Look, if the HSC funded your research, did they then look strategically at any differences they would make around welfare provision and social work provision, and working strategically to work with the Department of Justice to try and make that interaction better?
Again, they funded the research. Well done, Colletta, you want to do this research. Go for it. I have done the research. Here are the findings. Can we get a move on? And in fact, what happened is that when I finished my research, the HSC changed its remit from, it changed from being the HSC to TUSLA, and it's now being governed differently. But still, these issues should be addressed. I would like to see these issues addressed, especially when I think we have the Syrian refugees who are going to come our way. We have, Ireland has accepted to take X number of Syrian refugees. And I remember recently I did another article saying, I hope we're not going to treat these people the way we are treating people in direct provision. And if we are, and if that's the intention, then let's not take them at all.
Is that not a matter for the Minister for Justice in the Republic of Ireland?
It is.
And is it not best to raise it at that level?
Yes, it's been raised at that level. And I remember, because I have a big mouth and I pop up every now and again. I remember when there was a working group going to be set up by the Department of Justice, I wrote to the minister and I said, I would like to offer my expertise, which I think I have, to the working group. And I got an acknowledgement, and that was all. So one day with the help of God or some higher power, I hope I can have a voice. But I heard I saw it in the newspaper that the Minister of Justice is going to set up a working group to look at the issues pertaining to Syrian refugees coming to Ireland. And because I'm interested to see how this is going to be managed differently, because I've seen how it has failed dismally, I put myself forward. But I am still waiting to see what will happen. The working group has met and concluded. And I wasn't, unfortunately, one of the chosen ones. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm interested particularly in the area of cultural competency.
Yes.
I work in the probation board, and we have actually been rolling out training in cultural competency, because I think to be truly effective, we do need to understand increasingly the challenges and the narrative, the stories of the people that we're working with. But I'm wondering, here really, was there any attempt or efforts by the social workers to understand the narrative? Is that part of, would they have seen that as part of the remit? Was it part of the understand?
Yes, I think they did. I do think the social workers in my study did try to reach out and understand the different cultures. But herein lies the complication between culture, policy, and social work practice. So, is what's culturally acceptable social work acceptable? And does the policy back it up? It's almost like that cycle. So, is slapping your children okay? Is it okay or not? Can you do it or not? Who makes that decision? Social workers say to families, well, you can't do that, we don't do that in Ireland. But where is it written in black and white? It's not written anywhere. It's not written anywhere. So, cultural competency is great, and it's a great buzzword. It's the going word at the moment in social work, and it's great. But when you read the literature, there are a number of competencies that we try to exercise in social work. We need to be competent in our communication, in this and that. It has been argued, can really somebody be culturally competent? We have over 180 different cultures living in Dublin or in Ireland today. how can social workers be competent in dealing with all those cultures? So when you start the debate around cultural competency, it comes back to social work, to basic social work skills about respect, about how we work with people, how we engage with people, and how we reflect on practice. When you really try and peel the onion down, cultural competency is about that engagement with the person, that non-stereotypical engagement that doesn't treat you the same. See what happened in Germany on Christmas Eve, and see the kind of hot air it's raising. The stereotype of African Arab men who have come in and terrorized these women. I don't know who's right, who's wrong, or what's going on. But the stereotypical view of what's going on, of things, clouds cultural competency. So all Irish people are drunkards, they're alcoholics, they are too fond of the drink. They are Irish people who've never touched the drink. Right? So sometimes, and unfortunately for us, I found out that some social workers would have said to me, look, society colors your view about what's going on. We live in a society at the end of the day. Whatever is going on sometimes makes us think about people in that way. When young people were coming through the border, the time I started my research, social workers used to say, well, do you know what? I think they come and pretend that they're children so that they can gain access to the country. Because that was the thinking. But that's not your role. Your role is to ascertain, does this child need help or not? But then there is the other issue, that social workers must make a proper assessment, because if they get it wrong, if they put an adult with children, they are damned, aren't they? If they try and rehabilitate an adult person who claims to be a child with children, and then something goes wrong, the eyebrows roll, don't they? So poor social workers, they're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't.
Can I check just in terms of the €19? Would social services have supplemented that in some way if they identified child needed shoes or they needed, other things? Would they have actually provided those?
I think they could. But you would find that mainly it would be non-governmental organizations like St. Vincent's de Paul. Let's say. But these people are so far out. They don't know about St. Vincent's de Paul, and St. Vincent's de Paul doesn't know about them.
But I'm just thinking in terms of social assessment, if they identified the child had additional sort of material needs.
Yes.
Would they have tried to access them, whether it's through the charity or provide them directly themselves?
But where would they get the things from? Like where
in a conduit to actually make contact with the likes of other organisations or through your own?
And again, that would be a proactive social worker. If a social worker was proactive that way, I can't see how that wouldn't be possible to do. But it's not expected of them.
No.
And I think that sometimes people with heavy caseloads, lack of resources, whatever, they are so down in themselves anyway that thinking like that would be the right thing to do. But I didn't see it in practice. I didn't see it happening. But it would be something that could help, so that even though we can't raise the money from €19 to €100, but if we could support by giving something, well, that would be support to those families, wouldn't it? But if social workers have heavy caseloads and they must go from this family, what time are they going to allocate to looking to see who could support?
Are there any figures to suggest how many children from the direct provision come into the care system?
Sorry?
Are there any figures to tell how many of the children who live in the direct provision come into care?
At the moment, the statistics are very vague. There hasn't been statistics properly compiled to say, but we know and we hear that the numbers of the children children who are coming into the system, they are not just from asylum seekers, they are also from other ethnic minority groups. So they might be just immigrants, they might be economic immigrants, they might be, so they need the separation between asylum kids, children coming into care, and just immigrant children coming to care. That hasn't been. I think we'll get there one of these days. I'd love to stop teaching social care and do some of that kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
But then I have to eke living. Yeah, but I think what you say is real practical, because when you think about social work as advocating, as empowering, and as trying to get things done, that's a way of being proactive, of actually doing something within a difficult situation.
I know we did some work level just with the law sector here. We developed a paper about that, basically going right back to human right.
You did?
To look after children, yeah.
Good.
But it's, it's still, it's not supported by policies and law, and the different environmental partnership work with.
But isn't the thing, the whole point is that you did do something, isn't it?
But I mean, we have used it, it has worked, and other people have asked for access to it, it's not policy, do you know what I mean? But it gives people guidance, because we didn't understand the different immigration status, for example, refugee status, asylum, there's a whole world out there that we need to be brought to speak about, and it's helped start that. And of course the legislation changes, you get case law, but we keep going back and trying to get that document updated and keep it alive.
Yes, because things are always changing, aren't they, in that system? Everything is always changing. And it is good to keep on top of it, because before you know it, it's outdated.
So we do have experience of helping families, but I don't think it's clear that anyone has a sense of, is it, postcode lottery, different things, depending on where they're from, or depending who they're engaging with.
What's your system like here? Do you get any asylum seekers here?
Yeah.
You do. And how are they housed?
Your system of Department of Justice, we know different ways on a personal level, not in my role as a DY social worker, but we would have telephone meetings with UKD and NAS, and that's a real difficult barrier. And even in my marriage, in the overall scheme, it seems to me that we're not really supposed to be challenging them, or it's cheaper and easier to move the problem than actually challenge the system.
That's right. And I find that very difficult. I have struggled with that. Because if social work is about advocacy, it needs to challenge the system. If social work is about human rights, and if it is rights-based, and it is about a number of things I have done, I have only been able to do them because I'm not a practicing social worker at the moment. I'm a social worker, but I'm not practicing. And a lot of things I've been able to say out, either in the newspapers or whatever, I've been able to say them because I'm not looking at my boss and looking behind me to see, is my job protected or not? I don't care. I just say them. But I think it would be different if I wasn't. If I was in practice, I don't know, would I be able to say those things? I don't know. And then, you see, it's frustrating because the International Federation of Social Work gives us a definition which is not about disempowerment, it's about empowerment. So what can we do to deal with these situations that are so, It doesn't seem so bad here though. People seem to be allowed to work, are they? Asylum seekers, they don't work. Okay. Do they get an allowance? There is a danger. The problem with the whole issue of asylum is that it is political. It is on one hand very political, and on another hand very humanitarian. and on the other hand, very criminalized. So it is, but it is an issue that social work is not going to be able to run away from. Why? Because if our job is to deal with disadvantaged people, if our job is to deal with those who are on the margins, there is another margin that is coming to social work. And there is another margin that is here to stay. And you only need to look at what's happening in Syria to see how it's a growing problem. But you also need to look at how the different countries, the different EU member states are responding to it. They're killing each other. There is no agreement as to what should be done. And it's an issue about protecting borders. We are going to build the biggest razor fence wire that we can to stop people from coming in. And that's criminalizing the thing. The whole issue that it's a humanitarian issue is what social workers might think. But that's not what politicians think. I don't know what politicians think, but I don't see them treating this as a humanitarian issue that's here to stay. You know? And any propaganda that we can flag about asylum seekers, we're gonna do it to stop them from coming into our space. And when they come into our space, we make their life as hard as possible. But social workers, because of the nature of the beast, because of the nature of our job, we are always going to be there in the background. So going forward, I think it's an area of work that's going to come our way. More and more. More and more.
Okay, any final questions for Colletta? I think that was really interesting, and just want to thank
you for having me. Thank you. That's fun. So I didn't do bad.